Hi, I'm Kim. One of my students has been asking recently what a selvage is, and I thought it was an excellent question because as beginners, you kind of expected to know these things, but how are you ever supposed to know until you are told, or unless you are told? So I thought I'd record this little video to explain exactly what a selvage is and what your warp and weft threads are and how to tell the difference between them, because it becomes very useful if we ever need to straighten up our fabric and we don't know which way is up. So let me change camera so you can see my cutting table. There we go. So I've got a piece of fabric here with the selvage still on. So the selvage here is the bit of the fabric that is attached to the loom. So on a piece of fabric that comes off the bolt, you will notice you have two selvages, and that is either edge of the fabric where they are attached either side of the loom. And if I hold this up to camera, you will see in that selvage, and if you look at the selvage on your fabric that you've got, you will see there's generally some little holes in it. That's where it's attached to the edge of the loom. You may also find that it's quite thick, or it's a lot thicker than the rest of the fabric. So for that reason, we don't tend to use it in quilting, or for when we're cutting our fabric up for our patchwork pieces. We tend to discard that selvage, but that's what it's there for, and it shows you where it's attached to the loom. So the next thing then to know is that where your warp threads are. So your warp threads are the ones that run parallel to your selvage. And the way I remember that is because warp has an A in it, W-A-R-P, and parallel has lots of A's in it. So the warp runs parallel to your selvage. And your weft threads are the ones that run perpendicular to your selvage. So again, weft has got an E in it and perpendicular has got E's in it. So that's the other way I remember. Now, why that's useful to know is because if you have a piece of fabric without a selvage on, you can tell pretty much which is which by stretching the fabric. So if I take my fabric either end, and try this with a piece of fabric you've got where you know where the selvage is, and then pull it along the selvage. So if I give it a little tug here along the warp thread, it's got no stretch. So you can feel it's quite tight and quite taut. So that's really going to be a secure line along the warp threads. If I go along the weft thread here, if I give a little tug that way, you'll feel that there's a little bit of a stretch. There's a little bit of a give across my weft thread. So that's a useful thing to know, where our weft and our warp threads are. So you'll know if you're cutting this way, then you're going to have a bit of give. So if you're cutting triangles, for instance, you may want to include that across the hypotenuse of your triangle, if that's the right term. Now your bias, so that's the 45-degree angle. So you see on the edge here, I've cut a 45-degree angle where I've been cutting bias binding strips. And if you pull along that 45-degree angle on your fabric, you'll see you've got a tremendous amount of stretch. So if I pull in the middle of the fabric and I pull across, you'll see you've got lots and lots of stretch. If you're a dressmaker, you'll know that if you want a well-fitting skirt or dress that you can sit down in, especially for us more mature ladies, then maybe you want a bias cut skirt. You want your skirt cut on the bias. That's because it's got the stretch in it. If you like pencil skirts, then it's probably going to be cut straight of grain. So, and that leads me on to the next question, which is, what is straight of grain? So straight of grain is when it is cut on the warp or the weft thread, because these threads tend to be the straightest. So your warp thread tends to be the straightest one, followed by the weft thread. But generally, if you're cutting straight of grain, so you want on straight lines and you need them to be properly straight and properly accurate, then you're going to be cutting along the warp or the weft. So if you have a piece of fabric with no selvage, you now know how to discover which way is up with those just by giving it a few little tugs before you cut. It also helps you if you need to straighten up your fabric for cutting, and I'm going to cover that in another video. So I hope that's been helpful to you if you're just starting out and you want to know which way is up with your fabric. So I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.